let's start. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Lal salam.
We can't say these things, David. I'm sorry, but we have to be very careful, no? Of stuff.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even to say something like Lal salam, which is a leftist greeting. Well,
I'm just saying, right now the situation is that, people are being arrested for, you don't know, this friend of ours, Himanshu, just today, for many years, he's been fighting a case of killings of Adivasis in Chhattisgarh. And today the court has said you have to pay a 5 lakh fine. You're defaming the security forces. No, so the reason I will be cautious is because I don't want to get into trouble for some interview, I want to get into trouble for what I write.
Okay.
It's really bad what's going on.
Well, today is Bastille Day, a day of revolution, and there have been some interesting developments in a neighboring country to India, in Sri Lanka, where in the last few days, the Rajapaksa regime in Sri Lanka has been overthrown. And a friend...
I'm not sure, it's a little premature to say that, because he has fled. Gotabaya's fled, but Mahinda Rajapaksa is still there.
His brother.
His brother is still there. His son is, saying things about we have to, resurrect our family image. And the fact is that Ranil Wickremesinghe is still there as Prime Minister, as acting president. The protesters have been today persuaded to leave the, official premises, and there is talk of, nobody knows. There's a vacuum, and nobody knows, as we know from the Arab Spring, what is going to come in that place. Is it going to be military rule? Is it going to be some other form of authority? What the people did was they've reached the end of their tether, But who is going to bail out that country? The IMF. So what is going to happen? We cannot call it a revolution by any means. It's a brave display of protest by people, but I think we don't know what's going to happen. Things are very frightening over there.
The economy is in shambles, and there's huge amount of debt, some of which is actually owed to China.
And the economy took a huge hit because of COVID, and tourism dependent country, and a lot of mishandling by the Rajapaksa family. But to assume that things are going to improve is premature, because in these parts now, we are not exactly witnessing the winds of democracy,
Well, a friend in Chennai in South India asked me to ask you if you thought such a revolt against the Modi regime could happen in India.
Not any time in the near future. Right now, the Indian economy, while I don't want to make any easy comparisons with what's happening in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a very tiny country. The Indian economy is in a lot of trouble, and the rage that kind of surfaces from time to time, whether it's the farmers' movement or whether it's with the recent protests about the change in the laws for recruitment to the security forces, all of those get snuffed out very quickly, and all the anger gets redirected into this Hindu nationalist bigotry, and that that game works just fine, you know. So I think we're a long way away from seeing something like that happening. In fact, we are seeing the opposite. We are seeing state government after state government being bought over or toppled by the BJP. We are seeing a consolidation of the institutions of democracy falling into this ideological sort of tunnel. Very, very terrifying to watch this, whatever democracy there was being dismantled. We're seeing absolutely no movement, airing of opinion possible in places like Kashmir. And you're seeing a lot of violence on the streets. I mean, the regime has certainly captured the imagination of a vast part of this population, including the educated middle class, and of course the media is completely captured. The courts are behaving in very troubling ways. So yeah, I'd say that we are very far away from a Sri Lanka type of situation.
Well, I'd like you to talk about the farmers' uprising, the year-long nonviolent action. I'll call it.
Non-violent on the part of the farmers, not
Yes.
on the part of the state.
Yes, hundreds of farmers were killed by state violence. But I'll call it a successful action. It remains to be seen if the Modi regime comes back with new laws. But it's interesting. I know that you as a journalist went there, you talked to them, you found out what their demands were. What impressed you about that whole movement, and what kind of lessons can be learned in terms of coalition building beyond farmers? Or was this just a one-off, very, spectacular, but not connecting to anything?
So David, I don't think of myself as a journalist, first of all, so I didn't actually go there to the protest sites as a journalist. And in fact, I actually kept a little bit away from that movement, simply because I actually have known people who were involved in it for many years, and I have spoken at meetings in Punjab and so on. And the reason I wasn't going there much was because there was such a huge attempt on the part of the government to paint them as terrorists, as leftists, as extreme, Maoists, and so on. And since every adjective has been used on me, I was trying to sort of, stay away and not allow the state to completely paint that movement with people who are recognizably part of other resistances. However, because I know them well, and of course, there were many groups, many farmers groups, some of whom even are ideologically quite far apart from each other, who all came together in this protest. One of the reasons that it was successful is because there was a huge wealthy middle class of farmers there who had a lot of staying power. And then you had coalitions of landless labor, Dalit workers of the land who, for example, have major contradictions with landowning farmers, yet everybody came together because they saw it as an existential threat, what was happening, And you had a situation where, in fact, all the other things that I've written about, whether it was the anti-dam movement of the Narmada Valley, whether it was the comrades in the forest in central India fighting against the acquisition of indigenous people's lands by big mining companies, or whether it was this farmers movement that saw its own lands and produce falling into corporate hands. There's a thread that connects all of this. But in the anti-dam movement, and also in the fight that is going on in the forests of central India, you don't have the kind of middle class in the resistance that can sustain a movement on that scale and keep it going, So this was one of the great advantages. And apart from actually forcing the government to actually rescind the three farm laws, that movement also created a new kind of language on the street, a new language with which to address this ugly Hindu nationalist language that has become so acceptable now to the Indian media and to the supporters of the BJP. But that's the strength of the street does not translate into any kind of strength when it comes to elections, even in the Punjab or in UP or anywhere else, So one of the things that I think we've got to understand is that somehow the electoral process has been captured and compromised. And now whatever change will come from the street, like it did in the farmers' movement.
And I think it's correct to point out that although perhaps the majority of the farmers were from the Punjab, primarily Sikh,
Punjab, Haryana,
and other communities,
yeah.
as you mentioned. Now, Rukmini S., an Indian journalist, warns that it would be over-ambitious to hold up the farmers' victory as a sign of things to come. The space for dissent, as you've been commenting, in India has shrunk markedly as the Modi juggernaut has rolled on and emboldened Hindu nationalism. That's her observation. Now, one farmer leader, Balbir Singh Rajewal, said, and I'm quoting here, "We need to transform our movement to remove corporate control of agriculture." And then he adds, "Without removing Modi, this is not possible. It's time to become a united force to save India." Those are fighting words.
Well, I don't know. I mean, those split down the middle fighting words, because
calling for the removal of Modi.
I thought he was saying without removing Modi.
Without removing Modi, this is not possible.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, I misunderstood what you were saying. Yeah, those are fighting words. And well, the trouble is that, when you look at what happened in the Punjab elections, some of the people from the farmers movement actually stood for elections. They all lost their deposits. In UP too, there was a great hope that the farmers movement would turn the tide against the BJP and Yogi Adityanath, but it didn't do so, even though one can raise certain questions about how that election took place. Nevertheless, like I'm saying, the problem is there are two different things here. One is the street, and one is the electoral process. And the electoral process has been captured in a whole lot of ways, beginning with the fact that the opposition parties have run out of money, they have run out of imagination, and they have been in their own time in power. I'm speaking from the Congress to all the other parties, state parties as well, many of them have been so corrupt that they are spongy with compromise, and so they are now being caught in the talons of the enforcement directorate, and they are, most of them, basically being blackmailed, and therefore there's no opposition. Secondly, there's a system of secret electoral bonds, which makes the funding of political parties a deeply opaque process. You have the institutions that run the elections completely terrified and beholden to the BJP. And then you have a media which is really like Radio Rwanda. I mean, it's just frenzied, bigoted craziness going on. So to actually remove Modi in an election now looks difficult anytime in the near future without a kind of, right now we're looking, I was speaking somewhere and I said, if you look at something in perspective, like in the 60s, there were revolutionary movements demanding the redistribution of land, the redistribution of wealth. They were demanding land to the tiller, Then in the 80s and 90s, you came to movements like the Narmada movement, where people were merely fighting displacement. They were just saying, at least don't take away whatever little land we have. By the early 2000s, after, of course, the market reforms and things, and the disparity, of income levels, and the kind of devastation of the environment was going at such a pace, radical activists were fighting for what is called the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, where they were just saying, can the government guarantee 3 months of minimum wages to a rural family, and that would amount to what a normal middle-class person would spend on a meal in a restaurant in Delhi. And that was considered an outrageous demand. And now we've come down to people just being given rations with Modi's face on it, 5 kilos of atta and 1 kilo of sugar and so on.
Atta being wheat. Atta being wheat.
Yes. So it's like watching a plane flying backwards, in reverse gear. And
and you say that plane is going to crash.
Well, the point is that we are also, because of the nature of people's beliefs in Hinduism and other kinds of spiritualism, a very fatalistic people who seem to so far be able to absorb this punishment in return for some mythic future that lies in the past, So I don't know when that romance, when and if it will end. But at the moment, it's in full bloom, So at the moment, you're seeing a crackdown of the kind where every activist, lawyers, poets, writers, journalists, intellectuals, they are being hunted down. They are being jailed for, it's enough a Facebook post criticizing Modi to, people who have been fighting for the rights of those who've been murdered in, let's say, Gujarat in 2002, the first massacre that took place when Modi had just become chief minister, or the Delhi massacre that took place in early 2020, or the killing of Adivasi people in the forest that goes on and on in central India. But now, even to pursue the the normal paths of justice, appeals in courts, appeals in high court, Supreme Court, asking for an inquiry, have become like criminal offenses, So it's a very, very dangerous time.
You mentioned Yogi Adityanath, who's a Hindu monk, and he's the BJP chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state. And it has a large Muslim minority. And this Yogi Adityanath, who has incidentally, I think, been mentioned as a possible successor to Modi. Frequently. He has been stoking this Islamophobia, this anti-Muslim hatred, and there have been killings and people burnt alive in Muzaffarabad and elsewhere in that state.
It's not just him, David. It's a whole sort of, it's something that one could almost call a policy, So it's not just him. It's in fact, one of the bizarre cases right now is that there's a young journalist and fact checker called Muhammad Zubair, who works for an organization called Alt News, which has been brilliant in just systematically, debunking fake news, whichever political party puts it out, And Zubair is now being charged with creating enmity between communities and so on, because he called, Hindu leaders who've in the press club of Delhi and other places openly called for the genocide of Muslims. He calls them hate mongers, and for that he's in jail.
Well, this ferocity of hatred towards India's large Muslim minority, something like more than 200 million people, if it could be an independent country, one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, if it were independent.
If you say something like that, it plays into a very, very dangerous ethos, because that's what the whole logic of hatred is. Oh, why don't you go to Pakistan? Pakistan is for Muslims and India is for Hindus. So, the idea that, as if every Indian Muslim from Kerala to Tamil Nadu to Hyderabad to Maharashtra was part of the agitation for Pakistan, which it just wasn't, It was really, what was East and West Bengal at the time and Punjab, but the rest of India was, parts of UP maybe a little bit, but that's what the Hindu right likes to suggest, that you have your independent country, Pakistan, go there.
Yeah, now this Islamophobia has long been a tool in the Hindutva toolbox, as it were, to mobilize its base, but it's recently added to its repertoire of violence the bulldozing of Muslim homes and businesses. And you've written about this in Al Jazeera.
Yeah, that's a new, not so new, but now it's being revved up. So basically, whenever Muslims come out to protest, whether it was the sort of anti-Muslim citizenship law, which basically cut the ground from under people's feet, where you're supposed to come up with a set of legacy papers like the Nuremberg citizenship laws in the 1930s during the right. So there was a huge uprising against that, of course cut short by COVID. But what Yogi Adityanath in fact started it, identifying the people who were at the protest, and without trial without proof, without anything, just sending bulldozers to bulldoze their homes. And recently, the same thing happened because of the people who came out to protest the BJP spokesperson's comments about Prophet Muhammad. But the thing about the bulldozing, I mean, we've seen mass killing, we've seen lynching, we've seen people being what do you call them, killed in encounters by police, fake encounters. We've seen false arrests. But the bulldozing is a spectacle in which the public participates. So the media part, you have a bulldozer. It's almost like some divine mechanical god that arrives, an avenging god that arrives, and people are watching. The police are there, the media is broadcasting it, the courts are complicit. So it's a way of drawing all the institutions into the spectacle, the performing fascism, in which nothing is illegal. Now you're showing that everything is at our command.
You said that the BJP, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, Modi's party, is richly endowed. They've got more money than any other political party in the world. Where is that money coming from? Is any of it coming from the diaspora Indian population as well?
Well, obviously, the diaspora is hugely supportive of the BJP and the RSS. But the thing is that, like I was saying, they have these rather opaque systems where you can't really, even the RSS, which is actually the most powerful organization in India, it's not an NGO, it's not a political party. You can't study its bank accounts. The BJP itself has these, is the highest recipient of these opaque electoral bonds. So the whole system of money making is opaque, while everyone else is being forced into being more and more transparent, and every bit of our privacy is now available for data crunching. But this process is becoming more and more secretive. And of course, in 2016 November, when Modi suddenly announced his policy of demonetization, where suddenly, with zero notice, 500 rupee notes were no longer legal tender. This devastated all the other political parties. It devastated the Indian economy. It was like shooting at the engine of a moving car. But so the economic trouble that we're in didn't start with COVID. It didn't start with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It started in 2016.
In that Al Jazeera article you wrote on June 17th, you say, to my mind, this marks, that is to say, the bulldozing, this marks the moment when a deeply flawed, fragile democracy has transitioned openly and brazenly into a criminal Hindu fascist enterprise with tremendous popular support. That's pretty stark language. There's not much, yeah.
It's stark, and what I find, what is very disturbing is that, I keep talking with my friends in Kashmir about it, that in Kashmir, there's a sense in which you have a state, you have the army, you have the torture centers, you have the control of the media, but and you have, of course, many compromised people, but you don't have this overwhelming sense that a large section of the population supports all this. Whereas in India, we have that sense now that this fascist criminal enterprise does have a lot of popular support, and we can't deny it, you know. And so it makes you think all the time about how to live in it. What is the moral way to live in it? What is the way to write about it? Because your love for the place, for the people, suddenly getting colored by this horror that people are willing to actually participate in 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 uh, in the crushing of another people, you know, whether it's Christians, whether it's Muslims, whether it's people on the left, whether it's writers, and the hatred is so palpable, and so there is a fear too, you know, because people are called out, people are targeted, people are made to understand that we have laws, but those laws are applied differently depending on what's your religion, what's your gender, you know. And so a lot of things have changed since you last came here. It's very, very disturbing to live here now, you know, very disturbing. I keep thinking about, you know, like how did you know, how Germans went on giving their children piano lessons and you know, sending them to school and ballet classes while the unthinkable was unfolding. That hasn't happened here. It's not that, even though they are building those huge detention centers, and you know, even though 2 million people have been struck off the citizenship list in Assam, and even though the very foundations of who belongs to this country and who has rights in this country and who doesn't is being questioned. But, you know, people who've seen this coming from a long time are now, you know, subsumed in it, like drowning in it.
And, you know, the prime minister, now elected twice, Narendra Modi, former chief minister, as you said, of Gujarat, his millions of followers refer to him as Vishwa Guru, the guru of the whole world. Now, he's not exactly a charismatic orator or a dynamic personality. What's the secret of his attraction to so many millions of Indians who have gone?
No, he's a I don't know, I don't want to use the word charismatic, but he has this kind of the word.
Well, he comes across as an ordinary Jew, you know, ordinary person.
No.
No.
When he speaks at political rallies, he has this howling, sneering, threatening appeal, and he was called Hindu Hriday Samrat, the emperor of Hindu hearts, after the Gujarat massacre, you know. So what is important to remember is, how did he step onto the stage, national stage, in 2001 October, soon after the 9/11 attacks, when the whole world came to some sort of consensus on being Islamophobic. The RSS saw its moment, and Modi was appointed chief minister, not elected, but appointed chief minister of Gujarat. Within a few months, you had the horrible burning of a train in Godhra, where 60 Hindu pilgrims, an arson attack in which 60 Hindu pilgrims were burned to death. And following that, you had weeks of this pogrom, this massacre of Muslims, in broad daylight on the streets in the towns and villages of Gujarat. And Modi was the chief minister. And huge questions have been raised about how the state machinery seemed to have sort of stepped back and allowed this to take place. But soon after the massacre, Modi called for elections. The election commission at the time didn't allow it, but as soon as they allowed it, he won with a huge majority, So the language of revenge, of some sort of historical revenge, the casting of Muslims, most of whom are actually, people who belong to the oppressed castes of India who converted to Islam to escape caste, are cast as the rulers or the descendants of the Mughals, So there's this crazy sort of judo move that happened. And now the Muslims who've been pushed to the bottom of the social ladder, of the economic ladder, they are economically and socially boycotted, are, this is nothing new, but they are the great threat and the great enemy.
And is it known what caused or who caused the fire, the train fire that caused the death of 60
Well,
pilgrims?
there are lots of different theories about it, but I'd say, assuming it was an act of arson, because these pilgrims were returning from Ayodhya, where they were, where the mosque had been demolished.
The Babri Masjid.
Yeah. Yes, and there was a lot of belligerence. There's supposed to have been some altercation on the station platform, and things got out of hand. But the point is, whoever did it, you cannot justify going and raping and killing thousands of Muslims for that, And the fact is that the rhetoric of hate in the country at that time had been built up to such a level that one incident was enough for everything to burn, and that's what happened,
Now, Kashmir has a special place, it seems, in the ideology and theology of the Hindutva people. And you write, actually, you came to the University of Texas at Austin in April 2022, and you said, what India has done in Kashmir over the last 30 years is unforgivable. Could you briefly describe what India has done over the last 30 years and what happens on August 5th, 2019, when the Indian Constitution is abrogated and what little autonomy Kashmir had was nullified?
Well, basically, the Jammu and Kashmir was theoretically an independent kingdom. And like many, when people talk about it as the unfinished business of partition between India and when the Indian subcontinent was partitioned into India, Pakistan, and then subsequently East Pakistan became Bangladesh. But the thing is that it wasn't just partition, because partition sounds that like there was a whole and then it was partitioned, whereas actually there wasn't a whole. There were more than 500 independent princely kingdoms, and it was there was a violence of assimilation as much as a violence of partition. And so the way in which Jammu and Kashmir came to be a part of the Indian Union with very, very specific safeguards, which were written into the Indian Constitution under Section 370. But by 1990, you had a situation where, in the 1990s, as we know, the whole subcontinent was in turmoil. You had what was going on in Afghanistan and those winds blowing through Pakistan into Kashmir. You had here the rise of the the wild Hindu fundamentalism, the destruction of the Babri Masjid. And so you had an uprising and you had manipulation of the Kashmir elections, continuous manipulation. I can't explain it more than to say that it was the way in which America behaved in South Vietnam, you know, like with all their puppet governments and their rigged elections and so on. And in 1990, it all rose into an armed uprising, which then, since then, has been put down brutally. And you have, something like 500,000 soldiers, security forces, policing that valley, a valley that is now covered with graveyards, and tens of thousands of people, both security forces and Kashmiris, have lost their lives. And then on the 5th of August, arbitrarily, the government abrogated Section 370 and basically turned Ladakh, which was a part of Jammu and Kashmir, into a union territory, and took away the state rights. So they don't even, it's not that they just lost their autonomy, they don't even have the right to vote for a local government now. And following that, there has been just such, I mean, while that was being done, thousands of people, including former chief ministers, pro-India chief ministers, were all locked up. The internet was cut. There was, for months and months, the valley was just locked down with no communication. Nobody knew what was going on, no phones. And now you have a situation of complete terror. You have young students, journalists, photographers, any kind of communication that suggests any form of distress, any kind of dissent, any disagreement, any flagging of the horrors that people are enduring is just smashed with an iron fist. People are in jail, journalists are threatened. I don't know how long you can have 6 million people living in a situation like that.
And what about the possibility of what is called settler colonialism, that is non-Kashmiris coming into
So part
Kashmir?
of part of abrogating Section 370 also had to do with abrogating a law that made Kashmiri stewards of their own land. So now Indians can just flood in, and somehow a sort of population transfer could take place. It's difficult because despite all this, they haven't really managed to completely control the area. So even now, every day you have militant attacks, you have, signals that despite all this power and all this iron-fistedness, they have not been able to smash the place and secure it.
You and I both know Kashmiris that are in prison right now, human rights activists such as Khurram Parvez. But there's also the case which you've been intimately involved in, is with a non-Kashmiri, G.N. Sai Baba, a professor at Delhi University, who is 90% incapacitated. He's in a wheelchair. Nevertheless, he's not only been targeted by the regime, but he has been in prison since 2017.
He's serving a life sentence, but he's not the only one now. There are so many professors, activists, even the lawyers who argue their cases are in jail. So it's a silence. It's a kind of situation where I remember, in 2019, when Modi won his second term, it was an extraordinary victory because he had of course, crushed the Congress, but he had defeated all these sort of, parties that had risen in the 90s representing the, Dalits and Yadavs and the oppressed caste parties. He had completely crushed them. He had shown that you can win an election without the Muslim vote. So he had every reason to be, gloating. And he came out to do his victory speech that evening looking so angry, And the anger was directed at just individuals, all of whom have been given names and gang names and, who are continuously defamed on TV and so on. But it's as though they cannot abide even a pinhole of light, Everybody must be silenced.
Now,
which is not to say that everybody has been silenced, because people are still showing spirit, but not in the media, except for a few online, news outlets, and of course individual people. But then, student activists, lawyers, poets, journalists, everyone is in jail.
now we've talked about the anti-Muslim violence and attitudes that are so prevalent in Modi's India today. But you also write about the following: Christians too are in the front line of their assault. In this last year alone, there have been hundreds of attacks on churches. Statues of Christ have been desecrated, priests and nuns physically assaulted. You said this at your University of Texas lecture. I don't think a lot of people know that there is a minority Christian population and that they're under the gun as well as Muslims and Dalits and others.
400, I think it's more than 400 attacks last year on Christians.
And that is all part of this,
The Christians are much more vulnerable because they're much smaller minority, much poorer people. So, they're nowhere near 200 million. And so they are they're very, very terrified, And a lot of the Christian population is, inside in missionary activity inside the forest with indigenous people, deep inside the forest. So, attacks on them don't even often make it to the news.
And your family background is Christian, if I'm not mistaken. And does that give them the Hindutva people, does that give them another kind of X mark against you?
Of course, that has always been the case, but with me, they're a little puzzled. First of all, my family, my mother's family comes from Kerala, and the Syrian Christians are a very elite community there. They're not the community that's under attack at all. They're very landowning, very, as I have written in the God of Small Things, they are casteist, and I don't have that much sympathy for them. But my father, of course, my father's family, in fact, the 3 generations individually converted to Christianity. So yeah, there is that continuous theme that, she's not a Hindu and that's why she's like this. She's an anti-national and so on. But yeah, but my name is not a Christian name. It's not a Christian name. So I'm of such a mixed provenance that they don't know exactly what I am. Even I don't know exactly what I am.
Well, let's talk a bit about the pandemic, which devastated India, probably resulting in several million deaths. No one really knows. I was wondering how India's billionaire class made out during the pandemic? The Ambanis, the Mittals, the Birlas, the Andanis, and the Jindals. Did they do okay?
They increased their wealth several times over, But again, what happened in the pandemic, it's like Modi treats Indians as an enemy that needs to be ambushed, just in the same way as he ambushed us with his announcement of demonetization. He ambushed us with his announcement of a lockdown with 4 hours notice. And then the whole world saw that biblical movement of people, millions of people walking thousands of miles home, stranded workers in the cities, people getting crushed by trains, people dying of thirst, people in a panic. That was the first wave. The second wave was when the hospitals had no oxygen and everybody was dying on the streets and being cremated on the sides of the road, even in Delhi. But the strange thing is that I traveled in UP after that, where you saw bodies floating down the river. You saw thousands of these shallow graves, and people just said, well, a lot of people anyway said, well, if Modi hadn't been there, it would have been worse. So we are dealing with mind games now, a kind of situation in which everything, whether it's good or bad, works out positive for this regime. And I don't know when a point will come where people sort of address their own suffering and wonder about the reasons for it. But right now, people on the left don't understand that, just these very cut and dried arguments about hunger and unemployment and so on, it doesn't cut, it doesn't work, because people are living in some other realm right now.
And I must say, personally, I was, deeply affected by what happened during the COVID catastrophe in India. I lost my teacher of many years, and his son also died. But just one of many, many millions who perished.
It was just unthinkable what was going on. Just people's parents dying in their homes, people not knowing what to do with the dead bodies. I mean, it was terrible everywhere, I know, but the cruelty of, and then you had a situation where people were on Twitter begging for oxygen, begging for those oxygen machines, and they were getting arrested because they were, showing India in a bad light or creating panic or whatever.
Yeah. Now there's a constellation of organizations under the rubric of Sangh Parivar. Could you talk about what those organizations are? Obviously, the political party is the BJP, and the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, is its militia muscle, let's say. But what about other?
No. It's not its militia muscle. The RSS is the mothership. The RSS was founded in 1925. The RSS ideologues were very impressed by European, later on in the 30s and 40s, by European fascism, particularly by Hitler and Mussolini. Their ideologues have written very openly about how, the Muslims of India, like the Jews of Germany, the BJP is the front desk of the RSS. And then you have a whole lot of other organizations like the Bajrang Dal, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and a whole lot of other organizations which are loosely affiliated. And there's a sort of division of labor. the RSS is the most powerful organization in India today, the most powerful. And you have, all your foreign diplomats, German ambassadors, French ambassadors going there to pay their respects. And the RSS has hundreds of thousands of members. It has a militia. It has women's organizations, farmers organizations, indigenous peoples organizations. It has publishing. It has schools in which millions of children study. It's a nation within a nation, ready to step out and take its place in the world. In fact, in 2025 will be its 100th year, and perhaps there will be a declaration of India as a Hindu nation,
And there'll be an election in 2024, the year before.
2024, there'll be an election, but obviously, also they don't need any declarations because the Constitution of India has more or less been, sidelined.
Now, moving to the United States, a country you have visited multiple times, how do you see the world's so-called second largest democracy? The US, along with India, Australia, and Japan, leads an alliance aimed at China called the Quad. So India has long abandoned its neutrality and Bandung spirit to become somewhat an instrument of US power in Asia.
Well, I think that, the pieces are moving so fast now. I don't know. I mean, when you look at Trump and Putin and Modi and Le Pen and all these, fascist characters who've had dealings with each other, who agree with each other. So, Modi was in Texas and Trump, and he jointly addressed this stadium full of, the Howdy Modi moment. And then Trump came to India and had a reverse, stadium full of people, and then came to Delhi and was here when the massacre against Muslims in Northeast Delhi was happening, So I think these quads, things will keep changing, because Pakistan had sort of more or less moved into the orbit of China. So India was needed to, as the base to, the fallback base, which used to be Pakistan against China. But now Pakistan, Imran Khan is gone, so I don't know whether Pakistan is moving back to, American influence. The fall of Sri Lanka certainly also has to do with China, and the inordinate influence that China had in Sri Lanka may be reduced now.
Do you want to quiet the dog for a second?
Oh, Mati?
She wants your attention?
There are two of them.
Oh, there are two of them.
Begum Filti Jan and Mati Ke Lal.
I see. Okay. Can we continue for a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
10-15 minutes और? अच्छा.
I miss you.
I miss you too. I love you very much, and it's awful. Should I try to come? I've given up. Yeah, I've given up. Are you coming this way again?
I might come, David. In fact, Sanjay is going to certainly come first 2 weeks of October. He'll be there, New York.
Oh,
I'll be there. I think I'm supposed to speak in Harvard in November 3rd or something. So I might come for a bit. So
well, it's interesting you mentioned Harvard, because you gave a lecture there in 2010. entitled, Can We Leave the Bauxite in the Mountain? Field Notes on Democracy. Incidentally, this is published in My Seditious Heart, a collection of your many, many articles, all in one volume, published by Haymarket Press here in the United States. But you ask in this Democracy's Failing Life, you ask, could it be that democracy, the sacred answer to our short-term hopes and prayers, the protector of our individual freedoms and nurturer of our avaricious dreams, will turn out to be the end game for the human race?
So that was written in 2010. Interestingly, way before the BJP Modi came to power at the center and the way he did. But you already saw in India that this kind of completely uncontrolled capitalism was washing through the institutions of democracy, making the sort of conflating democracy with the free market. You saw the devastation of rivers, of forests, of mountains, of the plundering of land, of mining. So you saw a country colonizing itself in a way, in order to live the dreams of Europe and America, which America didn't, but Europe had colonies. So, and today you see that, the idea that democracy has been just reduced to the idea of elections. Elections are compromised everywhere. So, yeah, we are in trouble.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering also, does India, you must know that there's an enormous amount of violence, gun violence, killings, murders, and massacres here in the United States. Grocery stores, schools, churches, synagogues, people walking in the street. Is there that level of gun violence in India?
No, there isn't that kind of gun violence. We have a different kind of violence. I think probably the level of the intrinsic violence in society might be the same. Okay, girls. Should I?
Maybe they're hungry.
No, they've eaten and they eat all the time. Wait, shall I try and get them to go away?
Please.
Upstairs? Okay. Hold
Please.
कितना शोर मचा रहे तुम लोग? हाँ? बोल रहे? आवाज मारने से क्या होगा शुरू? अभी बीच में चिल्ला रहे दोनों पे. नीचे आके घुमाओ ना.
It's interesting in my interviews with Noam Chomsky in this Zoom era, he also has a couple of dogs that sometimes in the middle of our interviews start barking. They want attention.
I was doing I mean, not a radio interview, like a kind of TV type of interview with a professor from Oxford. And one of my dogs was sitting quietly at the back, Begum, Filthy Jan. So he says, Arundhati, is that a dog sitting there? I said, yeah. He says, well, you know, we are doing this interview for a British audience, and they'll all be more interested in what the dog is thinking. So can we ask her to go away? They won't be interested in us at all, the Brits, if they see a dog.
Let's continue. What about reproductive rights in India? Are abortion and contraceptives readily available?
Yes, they are. And I keep thinking that, you know, in India now, the thing is they broke the Babri Masjid. Now they've started on the Gyanvapi Mosque. They want to do break some other, you know, the idea of building these temples is the way that the right wing perpetuates itself. So I was telling someone, but the Americans are building their temples in women's uterus, you know, like it's so scary, you know, the ownership of that. Yeah, I mean, America is, to the outside world, I think, looking like a place which perhaps will not be able to mend itself, you know, and may, I don't know, even our very sage friends, I don't know about Noam and all of them, but even sage friends talk about the possibility of civil war, you know, but then I say I mean, a civil war suggests that there are some regions or something where people feel, you know, is there, but here it's as if society is fragmented and everything is politicized there, you know, through that lens. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's deeply destabilizing and the unstable place now.
It's a very fragile moment, both here and there and all around the world. And you said in an opinion piece for CNN, you said the damage to Indian democracy is not reversible. One might be able to say that about the United States as well, the damage done.
Yeah.
Now, climate, by the way, have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think there you see the obdurate behavior in denial of a reality that is fast approaching the Earth in the form of a meteor. But climate chaos poses an existential threat to everyone, from New York to New Delhi to New Zealand. Floods, droughts, storms, fires, and record heat waves are almost commonplace, with more in the offing. I often quip that the word unprecedented has kind of lost its meaning, its punch, because every time we hear of a new fire or a new storm or a new flood, the word unprecedented precedes it. But on top of everything else, it's critically important for the world's temperature not to exceed 1.5 centigrade. The way we are going, we will exceed that in a few years. I haven't seen you writing a lot about the climate crisis. I mean, there's so much to comment upon, but what are your views about what can be done in the time remaining? Because clearly the clock is ticking.
See, David, I think that, you know, all the things that I do write about, whether you can leave the bauxite in the mountain in Chhattisgarh, or whether it's about dams or whether it's about, the roads that are being blasted into the Himalayas, glaciers are melting and so on. But the thing is that I think that, the problem, it's like, it's like, people, every battle that one fights, uh, you can't, I mean, it always ends up um, with a deep loss of, even though people know that they shouldn't be doing it, that you shouldn't be cutting all the forests and mining, that you shouldn't be building a dam, that you shouldn't be ruining the drainage of a whole plateau. But somehow the danger of climate change is so vast that it doesn't register on our little minds, And so for me, the idea is that that can only be won by legislation of a certain kind. You can't make people feel guilty about driving SUVs if you keep providing them the SUVs. You can't be expecting some moral principle will come and overtake humanity and everyone will behave themselves. That's not going to happen. So I think that everything I write about, in fact, is about climate change. The perspective that one has is about what does this do to this world? What does every single one of these projects do to our imaginations and to that actual place as well?
Well, it's hard to deny reality.
Like you can't, I mean, people in this part of the world have been fighting those battles because they're existential battles. They're not theoretical battles, in Europe and so on. Now they'll soon become existential battles because of the floods and the heat and the rain. But, how many years have people been fighting, in the forests, in the valleys, in the rivers? But they were not considered climate activists or environmental activists, or even if they were sneered at for that,
Well, it's hard to ignore the reality when you step out of your home in New Delhi and it's 45 degrees centigrade outside. I mean, that hits you right in the face.
Yeah.
And you just endured, I think, one of the hottest summers ever in South Asia and in India, particularly. 40, 45, even 50 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, almost 50.
Almost 50 degrees centigrade. Now, you once told me, I'm sure you remember everything you once told me. You once told me, I don't believe in speaking truth to power. Why not?
I said the second part of what I said was that because power already knows the truth.
Ah.
Yes.
It's the Howard Zinn centenary we are marking and celebrating this year. We're doing a series of programs on alternative radio. I recall you have a painting of Howard in your home. Is it still up on where I can see
No,
it?
it actually got soaked because my roof started leaking like
no.
buckets of water. Yeah.
But you knew Howard, you did some events with him.
Of course, I knew him so well. And I just days before he died, I spoke to him and I told him, Howard, I have this really beautiful portrait of you hanging on my wall because you got to know that I have a big crush on you. And he said, Arundhati, I take that sort of thing very seriously.
Now, people frequently ask me about your personal safety, the dangers you face. I assume you take precautions, but what about that issue of danger?
Well, look, in my case, I mean, people will wonder when I'm talking about all the people who are in jail, all the people who've been arrested, who've been attacked, and being on the A list of anti-nationals, how am I not in jail? It's a dance of what are the costs and benefits to the regime of going after somebody like me. And I just feel that, while one should not be, uncautious, I think when they want to do something, they'll do it, So there's no point in getting completely colonized by this fear of what is going to happen, because individual people's acts of courage are so important. Like just now, just before we started this interview, I was telling you about a friend of mine called Himanshu, who has been for years fighting this case of a whole lot of indigenous people who were shot in their village, and he was asking the government, to institute an inquiry into the deaths. And the Supreme Court has gone and said that, you're mala fide and you're defaming the security forces, and you have to pay a fine of 500,000 rupees. Now that's a huge amount of money, and there's no way that he would have that money. But I just saw him tweet. He said, I will not pay that money, because if I pay it, it would mean that I'm accepting that I'm doing something wrong. I have done nothing wrong in asking for justice for people who were killed, and I will not pay it. Now that's such a clear, inspiring act of courage, So I feel it's very important for us not to hunch our shoulders, not to become paranoid, to be careful, not to be, stupidly brave or anything, to be careful, to be strategic, but to continue to hold our position.
You told an audience in Vancouver that your formation as a reader and then as a writer began because of a library. Can you talk about that?
I was, I grew up in a little village in Kerala called Imanam, which is the village in which the God of Small Things is set. And this was a village on the banks of a river. It was, Imanam is Kerala, so, it wasn't like a village in North India. This was Kerala with my Rhodes Scholar uncle making pickle and, but there was nothing there. There were no shops, there was no cinema, there was no restaurant, there was no TV, there was nothing. Like we had to just, make our own toys, our own fishing rods, spend our hours by the river. And of course, there were no books, there were no libraries, there were no shops. So my mother somehow managed to get in touch with the British Council Library in Chennai, Madras then. And they would send us 100 books in a parcel, and we could read them and return them after 3 months. So that used to be like just the most exciting day of your life when this parcel would arrive, and you were like so excited, you didn't know whether to open the book or to run to the loo. You were so excited.
Right. This piece of yours, Come September, also published in My Seditious Heart, has made, it has spread far and wide. And you conclude your essay with, the time has come, the walrus said, perhaps things will get worse and then better. Perhaps there's a small God up in heaven readying herself for us. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. Can you still hear her breathing?
I have to listen really carefully. No, I have to say that um, that was a time when I felt, you know, that the injustices and the craziness and the rhetoric and everything was so up on the surface. Uh, I felt more hopeful then than I feel now, you know. Certainly, I feel like uh, I don't want to be that person who just, you know, who just being hopeful because that's the position that you take. You know, I go through periods of very deep despair, but I also know that, you know, people, it depends on, you know, sometimes you have to just reduce the scope of the lens you're looking through, and you see people being so brave and so funny and so um, defiant. But I feel that, you know, it's not just the fascists and it's not just the Hindu fundamentalists and the nationalists that we have to look out for, but even ourselves. You know, there's been so much unpleasantness, division, this everyone locking themselves up into little silos, rattling their cages, locking themselves in and then rattling their cages. But the loss of the idea of solidarity, these are really terrible things, you know. So I do feel that we have also participated in flying that plane backwards.
I occasionally give public talks, and I sometimes conclude with that passage I just read, "The time has come," the walrus said. And, you know, every time I read it, and even now I choke up because it's so beautiful. It's so
So,
heartfelt.
so the thing is that, you know, I feel that we must, even if it's craft, I mean, we haven't talked about that at all, you know, because fundamentally I'm a fiction writer, you know, and I feel that poetry, um, literature, the way you build a story, the way you tell a story, the way you construct a sentence, these are all more indestructible than almost anything else, you know. And so to insist on beauty, to insist on uh, the fact that you are going to spend a lot of time trying to create something which presents the world as different from the way people want you to see it, you know, that you notice things that people don't want you to notice. Now, these are acts of resistance for me. They're not sloganeering acts of resistance. They are not marching acts of resistance, but, uh, you know, to put down the possibility. Like, to me, when if I were to take our conversation into a different space, I would say that I listened very carefully and I heard her breathing, and I wrote the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, you know, because that is her breathing, you know, that is the other world that's possible, because not because you have to create it, but because you have to notice it, because it already exists right here. You just have to look for it, you know.
And that your latest novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, is, as one person wrote, is crammed full of misfits and outsiders, the flotsam and jetsam of India's complex, stratified society. The novel is inhabited by cohorts of others, hijras, political rebels, the poor, women who will not know their place and abandoned baby girls.
Well, yeah, but it's also inhabited by people in power. It's also inhabited by intelligence officers and mainstream journalists. And it's like I said, it's not a world about just about mavericks and misfits. It's also about the army, the police, the intelligence services, the structures of government, and how these things interlock. You know.
What can people, particularly outside of India, do in current circumstances in terms of affecting in a positive way the descent into authoritarianism that the Modi regime and the BJP represent?
Well, I mean, that's a very broad question, and I can only answer it by saying that, just as we need to understand what's happening in the US, people there or everywhere need to understand what's going on in the world, and, not to just automatically participate in this notion of India as this democracy with Bollywood and all these, touchy-feely things. And, it's a dangerous place. And, mm, if India goes into chaos as it might, it will have implications for the world. But at the same time, I don't feel that. I think things have gone to a point where, like I said, we can't call it back. We have to go through. We have to go through it. And so all one can ask for is an intelligent understanding of what we are going through, as we should provide an intelligent understanding to others of what they are going through.
One last question. I just remembered something that I wanted to ask you, which I will then put earlier in the interview. But I was wondering about India's Muslim population and whether it had anything in common with African Americans. What I mean by that is that African Americans, some here have accumulated great wealth. They're entertainers, they're sports figures, and in India also you have Bollywood stars who happen to be Muslim, very wealthy, some very wealthy businessmen as well. I was wondering about that, if you see any connection between this minority being kind of anesthetized by very rich and successful types.
But that's the case with everyone, isn't it? It's this true of white people also. There are some who are very rich, a very small percentage, and then there are so many people who are just struggling to survive. So I mean, I think, it would be difficult. It would be, I wouldn't draw any easy similarities like that. I think, all I mean, if you look at what happened in South Africa, you see, that there's been, I mean, that is what this kind of unfettered capitalism does. It creates a small elite which is very, very wealthy, and the rest of the population it colonizes their dreams, that maybe one day we'll be that too. But this is true of every community, I think.
We'll have some of these, monster mega stars spoke.
In fact, what is true is that the Muslim community, unlike the African American community, where people had to rise up to the top, whether it was artists or performers or whoever, Muslim community, yes, of course, there are some superstars and, Bollywood stars and all that, but as a community, they are being pushed down the economic ladder with social boycotts and economic boycotts, and it's pretty scary what's happening to them, because it wasn't, I mean, the Muslim community is a very diverse community. It has caste just like the Hindu community. So you have, a vast amount of very poor Muslims who were actually converted from Dalit castes and, other backward castes to Islam, just like the Christians, to escape the oppression of the Hindu caste system, but they never escaped, and they are pitifully poor. And then you have the, the Ashrafs and the Khans and the, the sort of upper caste privileged Muslims who have been industrialists, who have, who have been in the civil services, just like Hindus, but now they are being impoverished to a great extent. And it's very difficult. I mean, the superstar film actors, they are under constant attack, constant attack. Like if they say a single thing, they can just be brought down because their movies will be boycotted, the halls will be burned, they'll be pushed out of. So they are very, very careful because they are, they are little industries of their own.
Yeah. So, this interview will be the last chapter, quote unquote, in the checkbook and the cruise missile. I'll be sending you, or Anthony will be sending you the text for you to correct some spellings and this and that, if you don't mind, in your copious free time, if you could get to that. And we'll have this book out, I think early, sometime in the fall or early winter of 2023.
And how are you, David? Tell me.
Oh, theek hai, chalte hai, getting old, having some infirmaries.
How old are you?
77.
That's not so old.
Not old yet, but getting up there. Yeah.
But
well, listen,
you're fine. You're fine.
77 years younger.
Yeah, I'm carrying on. Yes, all
Your
good.
knee and everything is okay.
Haji. Yeah, sab theek. Please, I hope to see you soon. Lots of love. I miss you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for being on the program.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.